This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, everyone. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to today's episode of the Play Your Position podcast. I'm happy you decided to join me today. I'm going solo in today's episode, and as the title implies, today I'm talking about vulnerability and the leader. Now, if you've been hanging around the internet for any amount of time over the last, say 5-10 years, you have seen, like I have, a rise in an interest in and almost a proliferation of blog posts, social media memes, books, TED Talks, YouTube videos, you name it, podcasts, with people talking about vulnerability and why it is such an important quality for leaders to have. This is going to be a bit of a rant, so I want to give you that warning up front. I am a firm believer in the power that being vulnerable gives us as humans. And I'm going to share some insights about what exactly is vulnerability, because that's really at the source of my rant today. Is like so many other things that become popular, vulnerability has been butchered and botched and misused and abused in ways that are, for me, embarrassing and beyond frustrating, because it is such a powerful thing to be vulnerable, to truly live in your authentic self, to be genuine, to show up and be yourself, which has been my tagline around here since day one. Show up, be yourself, and win, okay? Now, there are people that disagree with me on that, and that's fine. I'm not here to please everybody. I'm here to express my observations about what it takes to succeed in a complex and demanding culture. I'm here to bring you great guests who share their stories and insights, like Mario Lanzarotti, who, if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to it. Phenomenal. He's exactly why I continue to show up to the mic and have conversations with people. So, vulnerability, what is it? Well, I think I did a Google search. I was curious, is there a timeline for vulnerability? When did it start to become a thing? And it looks to me, there is no formal timeline, by the way, but it looks to me like Brené Brown really started this whole movement with her book, Daring Greatly, and she has gone on to be one of the thought leaders of the world in terms of how to be more courageous, how to show up in this strange ecosystem we've created for ourselves, where we're living in the real world most of the time, and yet we have this online life as well. And that's my theory, is the reason we're even talking about vulnerability the way we do today is because of this chasm between real life, where in some respects we can be private. We don't have to show the world everything. And then our online life through platforms on social media, and if you're a blogger or you're a podcaster or you're a vlogger or you do anything on the internet for your business, you are participating in that ecosystem, that culture, which demands these qualities in us that we weren't taught. Most of us playing on the internet today did not grow up with the internet. I've talked about this before. It'll be so interesting to see the generations that only have known life with the internet and how they approach problem solving, how they approach leadership, how they approach going about doing life as humans have always done life to a degree. Now, certainly advances in technology make our lives shift and change, and we adapt and we grow, and, on and on and on. You've heard many people say, well, we don't drive the horse and buggy anymore, right? And we don't all have tiny black and white televisions in our homes anymore. I mean, things change. But humans, fundamentally, we stay the same. We're slow to catch up, and we're certainly slow to catch up to the rapid change that's going on constantly around us. And one of those big changes is this opportunity to show up online, to play on the internet, whatever that game you choose to play looks like, what the rules are, et cetera, and so forth. Vulnerability is going to be a piece of that. And one of the hottest, meaning fiercest conversations that I see going on in social media is the one between the fake presentation of oneself through massive amounts of filters and then the real presentation of oneself. I mean, the fear that is at the base of that debate is so palpable and excruciating to witness. It's like, wow, what is it about us as humans that we are so scared to show up in a way where we can be judged, we can be attacked, we can, trolls can fill our feed with nasty comments. And again, if you spend any time on Instagram, you don't even have to spend much time at all, 5 minutes, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. And, go to any famous person, anybody who has an Instagram account, and you're going to find the trolls are out in droves. There are people who are defending the famous person for something they did or what they looked like or the outfit that they wore to some big event. And then you're going to find the ones who are mean and cruel. And you just got to wonder if, of those that are actually real people posting that, how miserable are you really? Right? It's so easy to hide behind, an avatar, a name that isn't even your own. I admire the real people who can be vulnerable in their opinions about certain situations that may not be the popular opinion. That's a form of vulnerability too, is taking a stand for something and being public about it. There was a day, and I grew up in a home like this, when we just didn't talk about what was going on in the family. There were certain topics that were not okay to ask about or discuss. One of those was money. I grew up in a home where I never knew how much my parents made. I didn't know what their salaries were annually. I didn't know the cost of electricity every month or the food bill. I didn't know what they paid for their car. I mean, it was such a weird dynamic. And as such, like many people I've had on the show who are in the financial services sector, many of them have a story that's similar to mine, where they grew up in a home where money had an aura of shame and mystery and secrecy, and you weren't allowed to ask, and you certainly weren't allowed to know, right? And that's just one example. We can fill in other topics that, at least here in the States, have been off limits, right? Sexuality is another one. Politics, certainly. Now, there are some families who talk about everything. I have friends who grew up in homes like that. And I think it's really cool that, they were exposed to adult figures who weren't afraid to address all topics. Now, lest I cast my parents in a bad light, I don't want to do that. My parents were phenomenal people, and we talked about a lot of things around the dinner table, which we sat at every night as a family and hashed out a lot of different things. And both my mom and dad allowed me and my brother to be vulnerable. In other words, we were allowed to say things that were on our minds. But again, there were certain topics that you just didn't venture into. It's just so interesting to me. So this thing about vulnerability, there's a kind of an interesting correlation between the rise of masses of people going online and being public. I'm using air quotes around public. And this battle cry for you can't be fake. You've got to be courageous and be yourself. And it's not easy, man. It is not easy. I know that showing up to the mic and talking about things like this can potentially ruffle feathers. But you know what? That's not on me. You know, when my feathers are ruffled, and they do get ruffled, I have to sit back and say, wow, where is that coming from? And I've done a lot of study and personal development work around being able to understand that that's what's happening. Oh yeah, okay, my feathers are being ruffled right now. Woo, why? And then diffusing it. I don't do it perfectly every time. I certainly have gotten better at it. And that's part of vulnerability as well, as admitting, that makes me uncomfortable. Ooh, I wonder where that's coming from. And again, all of this is a direct fallout from these platforms that in some ways, it's still a choice, right? We still have the choice between going online and not. And there are people who actively make the choice not to participate in any social media whatsoever. And then there are those who participate only on one or two platforms, like myself. Then there are people who are on all the platforms. It's really a personal decision. But when you get into those platforms, how are you showing up? Are you being authentic and genuine? Are you taking a stand for something? Are you consistent with your viewpoints? And if you change your view, are you, talking about this? This is all falls into the vulnerability category. What bothers me about what's happened in the last, I don't know, maybe since the pandemic, could have been happening sooner than that, is what I see people doing is using vulnerability as a way to verbally vomit every fear, insecurity, and frustration they have about everything, and doing that as a means of gaining likes or getting favors from others, which come in the form of likes or engagement. Fake vulnerability is, I don't even have any words for that. And then there's the whole opposite of that, where you're just fake. Everything is highly filtered. Everything looks perfect. Everything. And I follow a couple of accounts where that is the image that they put out there. And I do it from a social listening standpoint. It fascinates me. It's like, what is it about people like this who feel a need to do this perfection game? I feel like the more perfect somebody presents themselves as, the more insecure and fearful they are. Most of us, I believe, if you look at the bell curve, fall into that middle range where sometimes we, this angle and this lighting is just so great and I want to put it out there because I look amazing, right? And then there's times when life is messy and we just put it up there and say, oh my God, I'm having a crap day, right? Vulnerability as a means of manipulation online and offline, because it happens offline too. I any kind of insincere attempt to connect with somebody through, again, I call it emotional vomiting, where they tell you a story that's supposed to elicit sympathy and pity and empathy, just as a means of feeding their neediness. This is bad vulnerability, right? If there's such a thing. I mean, I'm judging it, but that's my point, is vulnerability is not just, I'm being vulnerable because I shared every insecurity of my entire life in front of a room full of strangers. No, that doesn't, no. I admire people who are willing to do that, because I'm not going to do that, but I don't think that really counts as authentic vulnerability. Yeah, it's just an interesting thing. And I'd be curious what you guys think. You can DM me on Instagram or connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a message. Let me know, what are your thoughts on this whole vulnerability movement? How have you become more aware of your own ability to be vulnerable or not? And, in terms of leadership, there's often, I did a Google search about vulnerability. And what I put in there was, when did vulnerability become a thing? That's what I put into the Google search. And the top results on the first page, here are some of the headlines. Why vulnerability will change your life. Why vulnerability is a strength. Vulnerability, definition and tips from Brené Brown and others. Daring to be vulnerable with Brené Brown. Recovering from the fear of vulnerability. The best leaders aren't afraid to be vulnerable. And that's on the Harvard Business Review from less than a year ago, July 22nd, 2022, that was published. Okay, so people are talking about what it means to be vulnerable. And I made this free spoken episode today because it's been on my mind. I guess I got to a point where I'm sick of seeing what I consider the fake vulnerability being used on social media as a means of attracting people to like content. It just seems so shallow, and it doesn't seem. It is. It's a ploy. It's a quick win, and it doesn't fit in. And so I think it's food for thought. I wanted to put it out there, and I don't know how much any of you listening today are paying attention to this, if you even care. For some people in my life, they couldn't they couldn't care less, right? It doesn't mean anything to them, and that's fair too. In some ways, it exists in the echo chamber of the internet, and some within that echo chamber are micro echo chambers, if I could say it, where we discuss things like this. But, in the advancement of humanity and solving some of the world's biggest problems, if we can't address the problems that we're facing in our own lives, which is part of being vulnerable, and then being responsible for those problems that we're struggling with, we got no hope. And so, part of my mission here is to be, again, encouraging to all of us, and myself included, to become more self-aware, to ask big questions that might be a little bit uncomfortable, to venture into territory like I do in my latest book, The Far Unlit Unknown. That word unknown is, that's a trigger word for a lot of people, because we don't like the unknown. And yet we're drawn to the unknown because there's a lot of excitement and potential and mystery. And some of our greatest inventions that have yet to be invented exist out there in the far unlit unknown. That's really cool to think about. And being vulnerable, being true to ourselves, being authentic and genuine and self-aware. These are the qualities that are going to lead us to new breakthroughs, ways of addressing some of the world's biggest problems. And I think as leaders, it is upon us to pick those problems that we are passionate about and invest our time and energy into finding solutions. And vulnerability certainly plays a role in that. So I appreciate you listening today, and I'll put a link to a couple of these articles, including the one from the Harvard Business Review, because the people over there at Harvard are pretty damn smart, and they don't know everything, but they certainly know a lot of things. And it might be worth your time to just read what some thought leaders are writing about the importance of vulnerability when you are a leader, when you have chosen the leadership path, when you have answered that call to leadership, as all of us here at PYP are doing every single day. And is it easy? Absolutely not. Is it worth it? Absolutely. 100% yes. So team, that is it for today. I hope you have a fantastic day. And remember, it's always a great day to get out there and play your position. This is Mary Lou Kaiser. We'll see you next time.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.